Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of True North. My name is Pádraig, and this week we're talking to Thomas Wyatt. Thomas is a spiritual medium, angelologist, author, mentor, and mindfulness coach. And one of his goals is to connect, help, and heal the hearts of those who have lost loved ones and have crossed over to the other side. Through his work as a medium, he demonstrates that there is life after death. In today's episode, Thomas talks to me about what he does as a medium, as a mentor, and as a coach. He also talks to me about his new book, The Angel's Advocate, and how he came to this point in his life. Thomas's story has its ups and downs, but he also acknowledges that those were important parts of his journey. So if you're interested, you might want to stick around for this one. Thomas, welcome. Spiritual medium, teacher, mentor, and online you say that you help families across the globe bring guidance and healing. So just to begin, tell us a little bit about what you do and why you do it.
So the majority of the work that I do these days would be demonstrating mediumship. So that's my day-to-day job is the mediumship. It's the traveling, it's the shows, but it's also like the one-to-one connections as well. As you mentioned there, I also do quite a bit of training. So I work with, not going to call them students because they're on their own journey, but I work with people and that have soon become family over the years on their own journey, their spiritual awakening, the psychic study, the mediumistic ability. So that's very much my passion. What I do, what I hope I do, is help people in some small way. I can't change the world. I don't claim to. I also don't claim to be the grand dame of mediumship, but I've been able to sort of carve out a career over almost, not going to age myself here, but almost a decade in mediumship. So my purpose and what I do is to heal from the inside out, either through the mind, through the heart, through the emotions, to let people feel in order to sort of heal from their past traumas, their loss, their grief, whatever it may be.
Yeah. And why is it that you do what you do?
You know, I believe each of us have gifts. Some of us have more than one. What I do best is helping people in any way, shape or form. It started in the early days when I worked in healthcare and nursing. Right. But through my own personal experience through loss and grief, I've walked those shoes, so it seemed like the right seat to take. And I do it because I know what it's like. I know what it's like to feel so lost that you're inconsolable with grief and you can't see a way out. But if there's a wee glimmer of hope or a wee thought or a wee seed of a memory, that can only be a good thing. So that's kind of why I do what I do. That's
amazing, yeah. And you talked a little bit about, your previous experience in a different career path, of course. Let's just take it back a little bit in time, through your formative years, whether, that be childhood or whether it be growing up in adolescence or even, before the last 10 years, what do I need to know and what do we need to know about you to understand the person that's sitting here today?
Well, I grew up in West Belfast. That's where I was born and raised. And I say this all the time. We grew up dirt poor, but we didn't realise we were poor because everyone around us had no money, so we were all in the same boat. Grew up in a council estate. And I'm one of four, so I'm in between. I was the youngest until my little brother came along. He stole my throne. But yeah, just a really ordinary upbringing. My parents separated when I was very young. And that sort of wasn't ideal, but it was kind of a common thread of my community. You would have had friends, parents weren't together, but they still got along. So it didn't shock me initially because it felt like, oh, well, there's two kids down the street that have the same situation. But in my early days, I suffered quite badly with grief very young. Like my dad was killed in a car accident when I was 6. And that was kind of my first interaction with grief and having someone very much ripped from your life without any sort of premeditated idea. It wasn't that he was old and frail and sick. I had grandparents that were ill. But his passing, it shocked me to the core because I couldn't understand. And what I was told as a kid was he's in a better place. he's okay, he's safe. But my brain couldn't understand, if he's safe, why can't he come home? If he's safe, why isn't he here? And my mother used to say to me, the angels came and they took Daddy away to keep him safe. And I thought, well, they better bring him back. You know, I didn't understand. I was just a kid. But to witness that episode of grief and what it can do to a person, it entirely consumed my mother. It destroyed her completely. And my parents were separate. It was the strangest thing. They met as kids. They lived 4 doors apart and got married at 18. And that's just what you did in those days. They were better apart, I would say, definitely. There was definitely hard times when they were together. My memory's not all there. I think I've blocked a lot of it out. But there was violence in the home. There was definitely things that maybe children shouldn't see. But after, you know, he passed, it was her one and only love. She'd never loved anyone else. And maybe he'd had a girlfriend here or two, you know, but she didn't. So it was hard to watch someone go into such a strong decline so young. And as I sort of tried to do with my grief, I became angry and a bit of a brat, to say the least. And then my mum passed away when I was 15.
Right.
So there wasn't much space in between them. And this is not to make this morbid, I promise, but it was actually me that found my mum. So it was me that found her. She passed in her sleep, bless her. And she was only 46.
Wow.
So my dad was 36 and she was 46, you know. So it was just it does something to a person. It changes the entire directory of your life, whether you want to or not, whether you're on board or not, it's happening. So I came from, I suppose, a broken home, and me and my siblings were left without parents at a really young age, and we had to decide, what do we do from here? So, you know, we went and lived with my sister. It was never really a question, it was just what was happening. So she didn't think twice about it. We're all going to live together. And it was kind of like a cycle, because I grew up in a really tiny 2-bedroom house, well, a 1.5 bedroom, if you really want to call it that. And then there we were all those years later, back in a 2 little bedroom house, cramming, sharing rooms with beds. And it just felt like, whoa, how did this happen? So I come from, I suppose, a background in the story that a lot of people can relate to, because I'm not the first and I'll not be the last person to lose anyone. But really, really ordinary kid that just had somehow in the deep subconscious mind an extraordinary dream that I've managed to kind of find my way along. But as you'd mentioned, without me rambling, after that sort of episode of grief and loss, I tried to get into healthcare, because the only thing I knew how to do was look after people, because my mum was terribly ill before she passed. So I went in and worked my way through healthcare. I was, before I left, I was a band 5 with the Northern Trust, just out towards Wyatt. Okay. I worked in older people services. It was my favourite thing. My favourite thing. Most people, maybe people watching, will think that old people are very, very sweet and they have lots of little anecdotes. I have met some of the most amazing elderly people in my life. The oldest person I ever worked with was 103, and she could outrun me. Wow. This is true, because you would have to chase her to get her to stay with us. Be like, please, just stay. We're doing the best we can. So I really did love that job, but it came to an end through health. I was, God, this is going to be like a series of unfortunate events. It came to a head just with ill health. I was in a road traffic accident, and it basically destroyed my spine. So it's not in a great place.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that, I'm sure, you know, I'm sure you probably understand now that is unfortunately part of your journey. You know, how did that affect you in life in general?
I went from running a ward, being in charge, really building, trying to further my skills, you know, studying, doing everything I could, and really loving what I did. Like I would work a 2-minute silence. I just loved it. To not being able to get out of a bed. I went from a bed to a chair to a frame to a stick, and it was a process, but it didn't happen overnight, and I wasn't prepared for that, and I was very stubborn. And I thought, well, I'll show you. That didn't work. That ended in me having multiple falls and extra injuries I didn't need. But it was the determination that sort of sought me through. It wasn't an easy time, both physically. I was in a lot of pain. I still have chronic pain to this day. But emotionally, what that does to a person, to be so young, and I was having people coming in to help me, and the role was suddenly reversed when that was my job. I was coming in to help people with, you know, different things with medications and topicals and all this sort of stuff. And then it was my turn. I was not prepared mentally. So it was was pretty soul destroying, I'm not going to lie. And it just felt like my world became really, really small. And I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to be here. It affected my mental health horrifically. And it manifested in different ways. Yes, I had, I suppose, anxiety and depression, but I also sort of developed obsessive compulsive disorders because I was really frightened of becoming more ill. So then I created an association with germs and me getting sick, and it was a time, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But it didn't go away overnight. And I would say to anyone that maybe is, watching and listening, if you, at any point in your life, if you've suffered with mental health, it doesn't just go away. It doesn't just disappear. It's something that becomes a part of you that you have to regain control of. And for me, I suppose the first thing that I would say to someone is you have to admit that you need help. You have to, decide what's best for you. If that's the journey of, maybe medication or counselling, whatever's best for you. But you need to dictate that narrative. That can't be done for you. And it'll sort of happen when you're ready. I feel the mental health services maybe in Northern Ireland do need a spruce up, to say the least. That's a whole other podcast.
Yeah. Let's not go into that.
Let's not. I don't want anyone sending us letters. But if there is an option for help, and it's not the alternative route through medication, it might be something of more of a mindfulness approach or a meditative approach or a spiritual approach. If it can help you, then go for it. That's how I found my way, was through spirituality. The other stuff didn't work for me initially. It really just didn't. And that's not saying it won't work for everyone.
Yeah, of course.
It just didn't work for me. I think I was too stubborn, and I wanted to know why my brain was doing this. I wanted to know what was the reason. You'd go to these meetings and people would say to you, and what's your trigger? I'm like, well, that's your job. You're being paid a lot of money to tell me what my trigger is. So that kept being pushed back. So I thought, right, okay, well, let's find out what the trigger is. So I kind of went off on my own.
Yeah. And did you find that trigger?
There's a
or
few.
Were there multiple? Yeah, I was going to say.
A few. So it's fear of being alone, because my parents died so young, and also fear of judgment was one of my big things. I was bullied horrifically in school. I was just like a walking dartboard. Any breath I took irritated someone. So I found few of the triggers. I'm sure there's still other ones just deep in the subconscious mind, but every day's a school day, as they say.
Absolutely, yeah. And I firmly believe that as well. A lot of people think on a healing journey as well, like you go in, you do all this healing work, and then you come back and that's you, like you're clean, and as if nothing's going to ever come along and change that directory again and or even attach itself, that you need to work through. Every day is absolutely a lesson and a journey. You did touch upon spirit,
yes,
of course, and I want to talk about mediumship, because I think that's probably one of the main things that most people know you for. And you did say, obviously, that what you do is, at the minute, is a lot of demonstrations of mediumship. And so I'd really love to talk about that journey, and how that unfolded. And I suppose what my first question really is, when did you first realize that you had that ability or had that connection with spirit?
Well, this is the thing. So I'm actually a third generation medium.
Amazing.
But I didn't know for a really long time. My grandmother was extremely, extremely gifted. And going back over like memories and doing little sort of trance work, there's, different vision quests that I had done even through shamanic work. And I remember my grandmother put me on her knee and saying, right, Thomas, read the room. I didn't know what that meant, but that was nearly her way of sort of giving me some form of training. So it's down my mother's side of the family. My aunt has it. She doesn't use it very much. She's not a working medium, but she just has a natural ability. My mum did have it, but didn't like it. And I think maybe going back when I was seeing little things, and she would just be ignoring, like watching TV. There could be a spirit fully manifesting and she would not acknowledge. So she reclaimed her power by not participating. Yeah. Maybe it would have been easier though if I had someone to kind of guide me. But I didn't really have an inkling properly. There was little things here and there when I was a kid. I remember one of the stories I was told was I was out playing on my tricycle. For anyone that maybe wasn't born then, it's a bike with 3 wheels. And I think it was like a hand-me-down. It was probably from one of my cousins or something. And I came running into the house and told my mummy that the boy's on fire, the boy's on fire. And she didn't know what I was talking about. Went out to the street was empty. There was no children there was no one about. And within about 30 seconds, the sirens came. A few doors down, a house fire had happened. And one of the young males, he must have been 19, 20 maybe at that stage, was trapped in a house fire and was severely burned.
Wow.
So those little instances, but maybe, people brushed it off. It wasn't until, sadly, after my health problems, sadly, after my issues, I went searching for healing. I was like, there has to be more. There has to be a way that I can feel like me or as close to who I used to be previously. So it was through that and through being really nosy, going and watching mediums. Went to Belfast Spirituals Church, and there was mediums on the platform, and I just thought, whoa, this is really cool. How are they doing that? And I think it's the detectiveness in me. I was like, there's no way. This can't be real.
It's like a healthy skepticism, I suppose,
But that served me well, over the last few years, because I believe if it doesn't seem right or it seems a bit far-fetched, it's probably not true. So it's helped me kind of stay really grounded. But that's kind of where it started, and I sort of dived into, well, this is the truth, I attempted to dive into awareness at that time, but it didn't feel right. It wasn't the right fitting for me. And then I sort of stumbled across angels, and that's where I did the angelology study. And I thought, this is amazing. You can find prayers, you can find meditations, you can find who you can call upon. And that's really, I would say that's how it started. And then the line started connecting, with that energy to the mediumistic energy. And I just found it fascinating that I was not very studious in school, but there I was reading Hebrew and I was reading Latin, and it was all just excited me. So it started with angels, and then it moved, and I was following the thread, and it was like, no, we have to go back to spirit. This is what they're taking you to. So sat and sort of developed for a few years, but I did everything a little bit backwards.
Right.
Anyone that sits with me today and trains me knows I don't train this way, but how I did it on my own journey was a little bit opposite. So I demonstrated before I did a one-to-one.
Right.
That's not, that's unheard of, and also not very sensible. But that's just me. So did that, and then went out and started doing like little one-to-ones, and it just sort of built from there. It did feel like I was catapulted into it, because it was like fresh meat, there's a new medium, let's go. So it took me a long time to kind of understand boundaries, and you can't save everyone, and it's not really your job to do so. But yeah, just sort of catapulted from there.
And how does working with spirit work for you? I suppose, I know a lot of people use clairvoyance to see or clairaudience to hear, so what way do you communicate with spirit?
So today, the way that it works for me today, it's a combination of all the clairs. So sometimes I see, sometimes I hear, sometimes it's a sense. My less favourite ones are smells and tastes, because I don't like that. But it's a combination. It depends on the soul. If someone is really adamant about coming through, if I'm doing a demonstration, a slightly larger one, there's a few people in the room, and maybe there's a parade of spirit wanting to connect, there will at times be a visual of spirit standing next to their loved one, and I'll know where to go. It's maybe not as clear as you and I. But it's the energy, it's the aura, it's all those things attracting me to that position of the room. So it comes in lots of different forms. I would say maybe my strongest, I may watch this because they might just change it, my strongest ability currently would be clairvoyance and clairaudience. So I hear a lot, especially with teaching. I need to be able to see what the students see, and also hear what they're hearing. So I would say, that way.
Amazing, And you touched upon obviously doing demonstrations, being drawn to different parts of the room, so you do large demonstrations, probably smaller demonstrations, one-to-ones as well, and you do the teaching too, so you're mentoring a lot of people too. Has there been a particular reading, I suppose, that has stood out or impacted you in a positive or negative way that's really sort of lasted for a little bit of time, or something that comes to your mind where you've gone, that was a really good reading, or I really enjoyed delivering that message, I
have like memorable moments. I have moments that stand out of families that I've got to work with. which just touch your heart a little bit more, and you've got to almost become a part of their family through the reading. The best example of both sides of that was in the early days. I had to play some questionable venues, so it was like little bars and working men's clubs, and sometimes you were sort of prompted as a bit of a gimmick or a puppet of some description, and that was fine. I knew the process in the back of my mind. I was like, I just have to do this to get to the next stage. It's fine. But one of the sort of more memorable ones, without going into too much detail, was there was someone at an audience of mine. I had brought through this young guy who had sadly crossed himself over to the spirit world, and he had shared some memories. He brought forward connections of different birthdays, anniversaries, and it was very, very strong. It was almost overwhelming me, and I became really emotional. And I thought, my goodness, he just wants to connect to this lady in the audience. And I had said something really random. I was like, oh God, he must really love his food, because he keeps showing me a chicken pie. I'm a vegetarian, so I thought, oh great, thanks mate. And that one random fact, this lady just broke down, and she says, no, that's what he called me. She says, that's a private name that nobody, that's what we called each other in the house. And I thought he was talking about food. Yeah. So I won't always know what I'm being shown or what I'm hearing. And I thought, well, that's great. She's got something she needed. At the very end of that demonstration, people often come up and we'll do photographs and have a wee chat and stuff. She came up and she says, you're very lucky that you came to me, because if you hadn't, I was going home to do the same thing that he did. And I thought, whoa. Wow. So that shook me to the core, and I thought, that's not my place. Yeah. Nor is it fair for someone to put that responsibility upon me. I thought, whoa, this is... And I was trying to be sensitive, because, the wee Westie was almost coming out in me in the early days. But I was trying to be sensitive because she was still in the pits of grief. All she needed was a sign or a symbol or a message. So I kind of thought, let's try and be diplomatic about this. But I thought, that's not your place. Also, it's not mine. If you're here for a reason. Yeah. Just be grateful that the spirit was strong enough to come to you in a room full of 100 people. Out of all those people, you got one of those connections. So that's kind of the good and the bad. I think people hold people like myself to a higher standard, which they should. I think there is a level of responsibility. You can't do this work flippantly. I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but there's maybe people that do this work that shouldn't do this work. Deliverance is key. You have to understand that you're dealing with people's lives, and what you say carries a lot of weight, and there's a level of responsibility that I don't think is always respected. I think we're really lucky here, because there's something culturally about the mediums that work here that they will do their best until the sweat beats off their head. So it's like, I want to prove to the audience that their loved one's here, but the audience also want me to prove myself. So it's not in a negative way. I certainly don't take it as a negative, but it makes you work a little bit harder. So I think we're lucky here. Maybe in different parts of the world where I've worked, it's been a bit, what did she say? On stage, on a microphone. But yeah, so I think we're quite fortunate here. Truthful.
That's an incredible story, and that's something I've thought about, and I've spoke to other mediums about in the past, is that there is so much responsibility placed upon that person delivering those messages.
I think also, you have to take some level of accountability. If you're going to go out and you're going to open up your life and also open up the lives of other people, yes, they've came willingly. They've either, their family's got them a ticket, or they've purchased a ticket, or they've won a raffle, whatever it may be. They're supposed to be there. Not every person in the room will receive a reading, of course, but they can take little aspects of that reading. I'm a little bit more regimental in how I will say things. So if someone has crossed over through suicide, I won't use the word suicide in my shows. I say they crossed themselves over to the spirit world, or they've taken that decision into their own hands, because I think that's also more respectful. But that word holds a lot of weight, and it can be triggering for someone in the audience who I may not know or may not be working with. So little things of that nature. Little trick I learned in the early days was, don't mention someone's age. I'll always say, this lady feels of a nice age, because I don't want to age someone. So I always try and find a way to be as polite as possible, but you have to read the room, and every audience is different. Some audiences are up for a bit of banter, some are a little bit more serious. Depends where you're working.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, you just touched upon aging spirit as well, because I think people maybe don't realize, and you could be of a different persuasion than I am, but I don't think people realize that spirit are still non-physical people, you know, or non-physical forces. And so we can't turn around and say, oh yeah, your Uncle Jimmy, he's just, you know, having a laugh here, he's saying this and saying that, when Jimmy's not actually saying that.
No.
You know. And so again, there's a level of respect for the people in front of us physically, for you as well, for them to respect you, but also there's a level of respect that needs to be given to spirit too. And I think, would you agree on that?
I would. The thing, you know, and I'm sure anyone that's ever trained with me, if you don't see it, sense it, feel it, hear it, don't say it. If it's not there, you don't make it up to make something fit. And, you know, there will be certain souls and certain individuals that have passed on that maybe pass in a similar way. So you could have maybe 2 or 3 people saying, oh, but that resonates with me. So your job and your duty is to find that piece of evidence that attunes to that one soul, to eliminate. And we always joke at the shows, right, who's still in for the national, keep your hand up, you know, little things like that. Because you think if there's 3 people, they're really hoping that it's their loved one. But I can't give you what is not there. And I won't insult your intelligence. I also won't insult the spirit. They work immensely hard to come through. And as much as it's maybe my name or my face plastered on a poster, I'm just the messenger.
Yeah.
So it's very much they are the ones that are making that, you know, that effort to give me as much as they can. Yes, I've put in the hours of training to try and understand it as much as possible, but it's not about me. It really isn't. I'm the mouthpiece, as they say.
Yeah, yeah.
And the term medium comes from middle, so it's that's the middleman or the middle woman. But it is a deliverance and a connection of evidence from spirit through spirit, which is us, because we're also spirit to spirit.
To spirit.
So it's a 3-way conversation. But yeah, it's very much, you have to sort of be honest. I don't believe in unicorns and rainbows. I'm very realistic, but I do believe if there's something there to be said, you should share it in the most respectful way possible. Yeah. What I do appreciate these days is there's lots of trading standards, there's lots of insurance things that are implemented now that maybe weren't. You know, you can't say something flippant with, oh, listen, you know, you better go and do the lucky dip this week, because that's just irritating to me. That's not something that's ever really aligned with me. When I used to, in the early days when I used to start working down south, they would always refer to me as, there's the little fortune teller. I thought, no, I'm not. I don't even know what I'm having for my lunch. I'm not a fortune teller. So it's not something that's really I've ever identified with. I believe I can see the potential of the earthly energy, the here, the now, maybe what's to come. But the majority of the work that I do is connecting with loved ones past. And mediumship's built on memories. I'm not going to be able to mention something that hasn't happened. Or you haven't lived. When it comes to mediumistic connection, yes, there's potential of little things on the horizon, but I don't believe that it's my job to dictate your life. Nor would I want to. I think free will is the greatest gift, you know?
Predictions are just predictions. At the end of the day, it's not necessarily prophecy, as the way I would sort of see it. And there's a lot of responsibility, again, held upon the person delivering those messages, and then it's taken as complete gospel, complete truth.
And it's almost, you know, what you've said is written in stone, because they've said it, it must be. And you think too, if you've done a few bits and pieces and you've been quite accurate, that's almost held against you, because then no matter what they say, it must be real, it must be true. So I always say, you know, if you, depending on the kind of reading that you want, if you're seeking some guidance, know that you hold the power and the key to your entire life. Yes, I can observe or maybe attune to certain things that maybe potentially could come, but the wording is so crucial. And I learnt that maybe the hard way by saying things I shouldn't have said in the early days, like, oh, I can see like a little baby coming. You know, you shouldn't say those things, because that if someone is maybe having fertility issues, that could be an issue. So I learned to, if I genuinely seen that, I found a way to say it in another way. Thankfully now, you know, legislation in my insurance, I don't speak about those things. So I don't speak on health, pregnancy, conception, or any legal matters, which sometimes people would come to me in the early days and kind of, you know, have this going on. I'm like, oh, I don't know if I'm allowed. But now I know a little bit more, and it's a little bit more covered. That's the disclaimer, that we don't discuss those things. Yeah,
and I think I found that with a lot of, I'm not going to say high profile mediums, because that sounds like we're somebody on a Netflix special or something like that. But a lot of mediums who are well known, will have it on their website, at the bottom of the website, for entertainment purposes only. And unfortunately, that is the way the legislation puts it, as far as I'm aware anyway, is that it is done for entertainment purposes, but you and I both know that it's done for the real reasons.
I had this debate with my solicitor, don't worry. So mine does not say for entertainment purposes only, mine says for guidance purposes only. Because there was sort of a clause, and if you go back to the Medium Act of 17 something or another, it was to prevent fraudulent mediums from working and scamming people, which is rightly so. I mean, you don't want someone to be taken advantage of by someone who claims to know and claims to have this incredible ability, but wants extortionate amounts of money. So it's for guidance purposes, and that's simply because the science is not just there. It has got so much better with mediumship, maybe not so much the psychic energy, but definitely mediumship with the brain waves and the studies that are being done. But yeah, I had a little query about that. It's like, I understand some people do come to my show for a form of entertainment. It's a night out. They can have a meal, they can have a little pre-show mocktail if they want, and then they can come along and see me. That's fine as long as you enjoy yourself and you have a safe night. For me, it has more meaning. That's all. Yeah. So guidance was the word that we went with, and we cleared it, and it was all everybody was happy with it.
That's amazing. No, I love that. Yeah, because I always sort of, when you see that, you sort of think, oh God,
it deflates it a little bit.
Yeah, it's sort of like it takes away the reason, I suppose. You know,
I find when that was the case, there was. Like yourself, I had seen a few things and I thought, God, I would never use that. That's actually starting with a negative narrative, that this is not to be believed or this is not to be taken seriously. My goal all these years was to change mediumship, and the idea of mediumship, it could just become a conversation. It doesn't need to be a prophecy or, this big grand gesture. It can simply be souls connecting on a soul to soul level about someone that they love.
Yeah.
Why can't it just be? It doesn't need to be. Yes, if things get a little bit excited and then grow, the atmosphere, the audience, the venues get bigger, but you should still be able to speak to people. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that's really important.
No, that's lovely. What you just said. It is souls connecting. Yeah. It's not, oh, look at me and or look at what this guy does. It's not like, oh, I'm going to read your fortune and tell you this, because it is that's a completely separate thing. Fortune telling is a completely different thing. But it is literally souls connecting, like you said earlier. It's a three-way conversation. Just a quick word from our sponsors on this podcast. This week's sponsor is Simply Zen. Simply Zen is one of the most amazing, magical and spiritual holistic and wellbeing brands in Northern Ireland today and across the UK. Simply Zen hosts a range of different events, a range of different training academies, and they also have fantastic products on their website and in store that range from crystals, such as the one I'm wearing on my neck at the moment, to incense, jewelry, novelty gifts, ritual items, and so much more. Everything for your magical needs. Simply Zen is the home of holistic well-being, and if you want to visit them, they're based in Belfast City Centre and in Lisburn as well. You can also visit their online store, simplyzen.co.uk, and if you want to check out any of the events they have on, they always put out their events at the start of every single month, whether that is training courses, ceremonies, retreats, or just a simple meditation and sound bath experience. Simply Zen is there for all of your spiritual, mindful, emotional and well-being needs. They also have a range of different therapies such as Reiki energy healing, Indian head massage, Rahani celestial healing, Hopi ear candling, facials and so much more. So if you're into your spirituality, if you're into your mindfulness, if you're into your well-being, check out simplyzen.co.uk. And if you're wanting to shop online for an amazing gift or something just to treat yourself, don't forget to use the code TRUENORTH for 10% off. That's TRUNORTH, True North, in your voucher code at the checkout for 10% off. So, why wait around? Make your life magical today with Simply Zen. So before we just move into the book, I just want to briefly touch upon angelology, which you talked to me about before, and simplified it for me, which was good. But for those who don't understand what angelology may be, or just because it is that term, and they're like, "Oh, I've never heard of that before," what does that come under in your perception?
So in my sort of perception, and I can only speak from my personal experience. angelology is the study of angels. It's the reverse of demonology. So if you think of people maybe do paranormal work, for protection, they will study these sort of entities, that kind of thing. My attraction was to angels. I wanted to know what it was about. So anyone who maybe identifies as an angel reader or oracle reader or even an angel expert would have studied angelology, maybe without knowing. But that's just where mine came under. So it is a divine connection between yourself through, raising your vibration is one aspect, but also aligning with that particular angel is really, really strong. And I found it fascinating that I could call upon all these different people that could maybe assist me. And I think, like most people in the early days, I thought, well, this is like a guy with like wings and maybe a beard, and is there a little cupid in there? And it's really so much more than that. It's a force. It's a universal force that's powerful. And I believe, just personally, that part of my work is definitely what saved me, because there's lovely healing properties with certain angels. There's guidance. There's hope. And I think most people will know people like Archangel Michael, Archangel Raphael. But there's like a list of these guys. There, depends on what text you read. But there's between 14 and 16 of the archangels. Now there's thousands and thousands of angels in different rhythms and vibrations. But to me, I find it so fascinating. Like 1 in 3 people believe in angels. They believe they've had some form of healing or the power of prayer. And then only a fifth of the population have ever had an angel reading. Right. So it's growing, it's getting there.
Yeah.
But it just shows you, sometimes people identify that genre with one specific creed or religion, and it's so not. It's in every scripture, it's in every text that I've ever read. And I mentioned earlier on about it being in Latin, being in Hebrew, and me trying to read these things, and I just thought, this is amazing. So it's, to simplify it, it is the study of angels, but it's someone who works with them to identify what angel you call upon, whether it's through stress, whether it's through anxiety, whether it's through hardship, whether it's through, simple things like, I'm going to give you an example. So Archangel Gabriel, which maybe is listed in a few Christianity books and different things like that, but also helps postal workers deliver messages to keep them safe. So little tiny things like that I just find fascinating. So that's where it comes from. So anyone maybe thinking of or maybe considering having an angel reading, that's where it comes from. It comes from those connections, sometimes through cards, sometimes through crystals, sometimes through intuitiveness. It all depends, but it comes from the divine connection between this realm and the sort of in between, because the angels are everywhere. Yeah
Amazing. And so what is the difference between an angel reading and a mediumship reading, or even a psychic reading, if there is one?
There's definitely a difference. So let's break it down. So some people identify as a psychic, some people identify as a medium, some people identify as a psychic medium. So someone like me, I do a little bit of both, more so mediumistic connections. A psychic reading is typically done through things like tarot cards, things like oracle cards, and angel cards as well. And the psychic energy is the here, the now, the potentials of what's to come without predicting someone's life. But it's the earthly energy, it's what's happening in someone's life, whether it be the emotion that's happening, whether it be sometimes the physicality of things that are going on, whether it's through stress or loss. But also we touch upon different areas, so that could be the work, the career, the relationship, the house. So those are kind of the vast things that happen in a psychic reading. Mediumistic is memories of loved ones past and communicating what you can. So the real difference, I would say, between, let's break it down, say a tarot reading and maybe an angel reading, is tarot is an ancient tradition. It's been around a really long time, long before you and I graced the earth, and it's not something that can be overly interpreted or influenced. It is what it is. And before there was tarot cards, they used to use playing cards. That's how they would have read. So that's a tradition, a bit like tessiography or tea leaf reading. There are traditions that don't change through mankind, through our influence. There are things that remain the same. The angels, because there's so many of them, they have different meanings, different colours, different symbols. there's a little bit more there to kind of play with, I suppose, and you can see a little bit more. It's a bigger box, in my opinion. And I trained in tarot years ago, but it's just not something I use a lot of. God, there must be hundreds of tarot cards in my office, but I don't use them unless someone asks for them. But that's kind of the main difference. So it's a psychic, earthly connection we're looking for when we're working with the angels, and sort of asking for a sign of maybe what's to come. Is this going to be a turbulent time? Is this going to be a time of healing? Is this going to be a time of awakening? You know, I think, without sounding really harsh, a lot of people are just not woke, and that doesn't mean that you need to be sort of praying and on your hands and knees and kumbaya, but sometimes you have to be aware of what's happening and be an active participant in your life. And if that means you need to seek out a little bit of alternative guidance, go for it. That's your ammunition to the next phase. You know, it doesn't make you any less than because you had to ask for a leaning post at a certain point in your life. So for me, it's like, if you can find a switch, flick it, you know, and turn back on to life, that's really important.
Yeah. And angelology, I assume, is one thing that's definitely been part of the inspiration of this. So this is your book, The Angel's Advocate. I love the covers, actually. I'm really one of those people for like navies and blues, but also greens as well. So the book is out. It's just recently been published, if I can remember. 4 weeks, yes. So and I'm sure you're absolutely thrilled with the success of it so far. Yeah, amazing. I'm just going to set it there.
Yes, of course.
In front of our Buddha can keep a wee eye on it. The title Angel's Advocate, what does that mean to you?
It was something that was given to me through a meditation. If I'm being honest with you, as much as I've had an amazing time in mediumship and in the work that I do, there is times it can be a little bit overwhelming. And I thought, well, what's next for me? So I was doing sort of meditations, I was doing a little bit of trance work, and one of the guides says, but Thomas, you're the angel's advocate. And I thought, that sounds really cool. But if I simplify that, I'm trying to advocate for the person in the room. So say, for example, you and I have a one-to-one reading. I'm trying to advocate for you, but I'm also advocating for our people, our angels. You know, I believe that, for example, my parents are angelic now. They're on the other side. Yes, they're spirit. But in my eyes, they're angels because they've left this physical place and went on to the next realm, and the progression of the soul continues. But it's to be the advocate for the here, the now, and our friends upstairs, as I say.
Yeah. And I suppose it's the opposite of that phrase that we always hear, the devil's advocate. Yeah. You know, so it's the complete flip side of that. Where did the inspiration come from for the book? Okay,
so I don't know how many people know this, but I actually wrote an entirely different book initially. I couldn't write about myself, so I wrote a book inspired by my life. It was about this kid, and he had all these psychic abilities. It would make a good kid's book, probably now looking back, but I hated it.
Right.
And I scrapped it. And there's like a little thing on most computers, after 30 days it's completely gone. So 60 days I came at that point and I couldn't find it, so I had to restart. And at that time I was kind of ready. I had sort of I don't want to call it a premonition and freak people out, but I had a sort of precognitive dream of some description. I had this overwhelming feeling I needed to tell my story before someone else did, and I had to get it down. So it came from that, and it's a little bit, you know, biographical in the context. There's quite personal things in the book about me that really, until it came out, that even some of my family didn't know, so other living people didn't know about certain things. But it's warts and all, and I didn't see the point in writing a book that made my life out to be a fairy tale, when really it wasn't. Some people have hard times, but it doesn't make you less. It makes you tough, it makes you strong, not tough as in harsh, but tough to life. It makes you resilient. So it came from that, and it's just sort of a little bit of a peek into my journey to find the subtitle's The Spirit Within, so to find the spirit within me, within you, within the people I've met over the years. So it just sort of unraveled from there. But yeah, it was really good. And in the book, we spoke about memorable moments. So there's some families that agreed to be in the book, so it's really nice. Now, not overly, but it was just as I was writing. I don't want to spoil anything in case anyone hasn't read it, but as I was writing and I got to chapter 11, and I was like, I remember this lovely story and things that happened. So that chapter flew out of me before I'd even asked for permission to keep the story. And the person in the chapter was born on the 11th of the 11th, and they turned out to be chapter 11. So it was like divine intervention. So it had to be.
Yeah.
And very, very grateful to the Lovely Souls family that agreed to be in the book. And they're also in the book. They have their say. So it's not just my book. It's very much their book as well. But it was a process. I mean, maybe people don't know this. I'm actually dyslexic. So writing the book was pretty tough for me. And I had an amazing editor who sometimes was in disbelief. Did you write this? And I was like, yes, I did. So it was a process. So I had to really trust myself. It certainly showed me what I could achieve. But I'm very, very proud of it. It's only been 4 weeks, so it's still very surreal.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm sure there's been a lot of support as well for it too, which I have seen firsthand anyway. And you've had so much support from other local, and I'm going to use the term high profile, but maybe a little bit more known than some others, mediums and psychics here in Belfast and around, probably around the nation and maybe even the globe. What does that mean to you? How does that feel to be, supported in that community?
It's really nice. So I always, when I was coming up, there was no mincing of words. You were too young, you were too fat, you were too thin, you were too gay. So whatever it was, there was someone who had something to say. So to look at maybe people, that I would have been inspired by, definitely, because they paved the way. To turn up to my book launch, to be there for me, it was very surreal. So it was a lovely moment. And there was one moment, one of the ladies that came, it was like the role had reversed, because it was only a few years ago when I was at the other end of that table, and she was signing a book for me, and she thought, this is amazing, you've done so well. So it was nice to feel the love, and I did really feel the love. It was just it hasn't really hit me. Yeah, it hasn't. And I get like updates all the time. Like it's now in Waterstones. So one of the fans who live in America sent me a picture from Barnes and Noble, and I'm like, okay. So it's really happening, and it just feels a bit strange that I'm in a book and that everybody is buying it and liking it. Yeah. So, but the support has been phenomenal.
I wanted to ask about demonstrations.
Yes.
And how you feel when you're in that moment. A lot of people maybe, and you touched upon earlier on, some mediums might really break the sweat whenever they're trying to deliver a message. How does that work for you? How do you feel in those moments?
I'm looking for a fire escape still to this day, but it's because I want to do well for those people. I believe currently, given the current state of affairs and the economy, money is really hard to come by. So if someone has purchased a ticket to come to my show and watch a demonstration of mediumship, I need to be up to scratch. I can't just sit there and say, well, maybe, possibly, no, that's not. If the table was reversed, I would be raging. So there's a level of I suppose, power that needs to be had, and it is an element of professionalism, but there's also an element of being able to connect with an audience. I don't like using the word performance, but there is a stage presence that's needed. You need to be able to reach every single person in that room, and also be respectful of every single cultural opinion in that room, and also be very mindful that what you say will leave that room and be carried on. So there's a lot of pressure. So I do get nervous. I think nerves are a good thing. But once I'm there, I'm fine. Once I'm on the stage, there's not an issue. It's actually getting me to come off. That's normally the problem, because we normally run over, because I'm just like, there's another one. But I get excited, because to me, it's still, every connection still feels so new, and it's exciting. And I just think, God, if that was me, and that was my mum or my dad or my grandparents or my son or my daughter, that would really make my day or my night. So I get excited from it, but it does, I think you have to have the chops to do it. That's what I would say. Yeah. So I'm quite hard on myself in that respect.
Yeah. And what is it like when you step off of that stage? I'm sure, people want to talk to you. People maybe want photographs and things like that. If they want the book now, they get you to sign it, But traditionally, how do you feel after a demonstration? You know, are you tired? Is it draining? Is it like, you know, overwhelming gratification and gratitude just for having worked with spirit and the people in front of you?
It's an amalgamation of all those things. So I have sort of a practice that I've done over the last couple of years, and I fast before demonstrations. I really just have water, and if I feel like I need to, I'll maybe have something very small. If I was to eat a big heavy meal, I would feel bloated and it would weigh me down. So I need to be as light and lift as possible. So I'm almost translucent by the end of it because I've been fasting the whole day. But yeah, we do the normal stuff. We'll meet everyone we can. I always make a point of saying hello to everyone. And also, it's another way, I tell this to my students, I ask everyone their name. Hello, how are you? What's your name? And I'll take that name, and it could become a symbol for me in an upcoming reading or a demonstration. So I do all that stuff, and it's amazing. But I begin to sort of slowly turn off, and that's why people don't often understand, but I always speak about my work in the third person. So it's what is Wyatt doing, what's on Wyatt's schedule, so I can separate. So the minute, you know, that everyone leaves, we pack up in the car. I'm normally getting undressed in the car, and I keep a little bag with me with like my scruffs and my Uggs. It's nothing really fancy.
Something cozy.
But when I'm working, that's like my uniform. So I nearly take that off, get comfortable, but I do be drained, so I don't demonstrate. Very rarely will I demonstrate back to back, as in, unless we're in England, just because you have to, just with travel. But me physically, my own ailments, I don't, so I need a few days. There has been occasions where I've tried to, and it just doesn't work as well. It lackluster, sort of the readings afterwards. But it's a complete wind down. You know, I'm very sensitive to noise and very sensitive to light. It's otherworldly. You feel very thin. You almost fade a little bit. Yeah. But you can't really think of it in the moment, but it's afterwards when you rewatch the film or you get some of the feedback. Well, that was a good night, or could I have done this better, or could that have been improved?
Yeah. And for people who are maybe a little more skeptical, who may be listening and thinking, I've never had any type of reading before, or what is this guy even talking about? Yeah. Although for some reason I'm still listening this far in. What would you say, and I mean, we're not preaching because that's not what we're doing, but what would you say to those people who have that sense of skepticism, and it may be healthy skepticism? What would you say to those people to sort of help them maybe come out of their bubble a little bit? Because I always find that it is just us staying within our bubble and not sort of exploring.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I actually start off with at every event, every show I've ever done, is I remind everyone that I'm not here to change anyone's beliefs, but I'm also not there to have mine changed. So let's live in a common level of respecting each other's belief system. If you are still watching, if you are still listening, there might just be a curiosity within you, and that little spark of what could that be? Be nosy, go and find out. I wouldn't recommend maybe someone paying extortionate amounts of money to have a private reading with someone, or, you know, traveling the country to go and see someone. But if there's someone in your local area that has maybe a good reputation, that has been sort of what's the proper word, vetted by the community, so people have, you know, tried and tested this person, go. What, you know, you've nothing to lose. If anything, you walk away with more empowerment, knowing that that's not for you, but it might just be. And some of the connections that I've got the chance to do over the years have been with people that maybe didn't really want to be there, but have then since grown into it, and have then went on into development groups, and now are working mediums. So everything comes to you at the right time. But I say this to everyone, and it maybe leads into sort of my mindfulness work: get out of your own way. The only thing that you're blocking is the potential of a blessing. Every opportunity, everything in our life causes an effect. And whether it's good, bad, or other, we will learn from that. We will grow from that. We will know, I will never let this person hurt me again, or I will always do it this way because this is amazing. So you're collecting inventory of your life, and it helps you grow that little bit more. And if that can happen from simply going and seeing a medium that maybe you aren't too sure about, well, that can only be a good thing, I feel.
Yeah, the only
Give
thing
it a go. You never know.
the only thing you're losing is the potential of a blessing. That is an amazing phrase that'll be in your next book.
Well,
that is so lovely, honestly, and I think that if anybody is still listening and still watching and they have this spark of curiosity, because that was always for me the main thing as well. You know, members of my family were receiving readings from God knows how long. I can remember when I was so young, and it was always that spark of curiosity. I was like, what is that? Like, you know, I'd love to try and go and hear more about that, or even do that myself. And that sort of led me down my path as well, too. But if you're listening and you're watching and you have that healthy skepticism, or even any type of skepticism, go try it. And like you said, what's the worst that's going to happen? What's the most you're going to lose? If anything, like you said, you're going to feel more empowered after it for knowing, yeah, that doesn't resonate with me. Fair play to that person, and that's their thing, or all those people in that room. And I'm going to get on with my journey and find what works for me. Is there anything that you're working on personally or professionally at the minute, or any goals you're working towards?
Personally, for me this year, it's the year of the rabbit. So it's the year of abundance. And I've promised myself that I will say yes to the things that I want to do that maybe aren't aligning with traditionally what I do for work. So I'm having a little bit of a creative outlet, things like music and writing stuff. So for me, it's the year of yes in that realm. Professionally, this year is a big year for me. I will be headlining the Waterfront Hall in October.
Amazing.
I'm joined by my lovely mother-in-law, so it's double trouble. But it's very empowering, and it's a great achievement, but it's also very daunting. It's something that I think I grew up with. Everyone knows about the Waterfront Hall, the Odyssey. All those things are there so they stand alone in their own power. So looking forward to that. So it's the 16th of October. Definitely a big night for mediumship for this country anyway.
Yeah. It's probably one of the biggest. It's the Waterfront Studio. Isn't it? It's one of the biggest sort of venues that I sort of can think of any sort of demonstrations of mediumship happening, especially in Belfast, in Northern Ireland in general. So October time at the minute when this goes out, tickets will still be available, I assume. I
hope.
if they haven't sold out already. And amazing. Well, best of luck with it.
Thank you.
And not that you'll need it, but loads of good wishes for the book as well.
Thank you very much.
Before we finish off, we have what I call the Magic 3 at the very end, and it's the same 3 questions that everybody gets. It's probably the only sort of structure to this whole conversation that we have. So the first one is, what is the best advice that you've ever heard?
If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. And I don't mean that in an intellect kind of way. I mean, if you're in a room and you have an awareness and you can see the potential of something that's capable, and the people with you can't, you're in the wrong room.
Yeah.
So it's time to cut ties and go to the next room.
Yeah. That's amazing. You know, I've heard that before in a slightly different context, where in a sense, if you're the smartest person, you're not really going to learn anything. In a sense, you know, go to a room where people have a bit more experience or know a bit more than you, so that you can learn from them.
Exactly.
In a sense, because all you're going to be doing is passing your knowledge on to the people who don't know as much as you. It's if you're the smartest person in the room, find a new room. I love it. What is the most valuable lesson you've learned from life so far?
That it goes on. That even when it's that hit me. That even when it feels like the end has come, it goes on. Maybe not here in the physical world, but it goes on. And you know, you can't change the weather, but you can certainly change how you let it affect you. So rainy days, go and dance in the rain, you know, if you really want to. Hopefully you don't get hypothermia, but you know, the sun doesn't have to be sweat, it can be smiles. So it's how you interpret life. And sort of jump on that pulse of life and be a part of it.
Perspective. That's
Definitely.
the main thing, I think. Yeah, absolutely. And a final question. True North is all about direction towards purpose, the name of this podcast, True North. What do you define as your purpose at this point in your life?
I feel at this point my purpose is definitely education. Educating others to the best of my ability, but also educating myself. There's things that I want to learn. There's things that I want to do. So if I can pick up something and then share it with someone else, that's definitely my purpose at the moment. And it seems to be my workflow is definitely being inundated with courses and circles. So it's definitely where I'm being pulled currently.
Yeah, the demand is there.
Yeah.
And you're like, I don't know how I'm going to meet this,
Yeah.
but I'll do it. Yeah, and you've got that drive, and you know, like you said at the very, very start, you were driven. You know, always driven, and of course, driven to write this amazing book as well,
Thank you.
which everybody is raving about. Where can people get the book? And where can
All
people
over.
find you?
So you can actually get a signed copy from my website if you want to. If you weren't able to make any of the little sign-ins that were happening. But you can get it from my website, which is just thomaswyattmedium.co.uk. You can get it on Amazon. It comes the next day, which is good. You can get it on Kindle if you're a Kindle person. But it's slowly made its way to all the bookstores. So it's in Waterstones. We actually have one in Belfast.
Amazing.
Yeah, so it's everywhere.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so give it a read.
And people can find you for demonstrations and medium one-to-one readings and things like that on your website as well?
The website's probably the best place because it has all the socials, it has all the other stuff on it, and all I have a list of additional services. So if you can't get in with me, there's a full team of readers that work under me. So it's good that way, especially if someone maybe wants some answers now and doesn't want to wait.
Yeah,
till
a little
next July. So
fantastic, amazing. Well, listen, thank you very much for coming
Thank
on.
you.
I really, really appreciate it. All of the links for the website, for Thomas's website, and how you can get in touch with him and the book as well. We'll put the Amazon link into it so people can go directly to it. Will be in the description of this podcast. All that's left to say is thank you very much, Thomas, and thank you to everybody for listening. Have a great week.